Hello YouTubers, Alaska Prepper here. Well, ladies and gentlemen, today I'm going to talk about somewhat of a dry subject, but it's something that we really need to keep our eyes on because it will affect how you can better prepare for the future. When you hear these two words come out of the mouths of a government pundit or even the Federal Reserve or the Treasury, whatever it may be, make sure that you prep like you've never prepped before, because shortages are coming. I don't mean shortages like we've been seeing, empty spots here and there. I mean real shortages, where eventually there just won't be anything on the shelves. And those two words are price controls. A lot of people don't understand exactly how price controls work. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to explain it to you the way that I understand it, right, in layman terms. And then I'm going to go ahead and read it to you from someone that is a lot more educated than I am, that has really studied this for a long time and understands it in and out, all of its intricacies. But I want to explain it to you the way that I understand it first, because most people are laymen, meaning they're regular people. They don't have a master's degree in economics or anything like that, right? So all of the fancy words can pretty much go over our heads. I know that it takes me a long time to read an article and try to understand exactly what they're saying. I often have to go to a dictionary to look up words that I don't understand in order for it to make sense to me. So let's go ahead and start off with the way that I see price controls. And I'm just going to give you a simple example on a potato farmer, let's say, right? First thing you have to understand, ladies and gentlemen, is nobody works for free. No matter how much they love their job. Let's say you're a potato farmer and you've been doing it for generations. It's been in your family for ever since you can remember, right? For generations. And you love doing it. It's in your blood. It's what you do. It's what your mission on earth is to grow potatoes the best that you can and sell them to the public so that they can have a good product. Well, let's say, for example, that you're growing potatoes and you're profiting, able to make a living growing potatoes and selling them for $1 a pound, let's say. Right now, I'm just making up that number, $1 a pound. I'm sure it's a lot less than that right now for potato farmers. But you're selling them for $1 a pound and everything is working great. You're selling potatoes and you're making a living, enough to pay your bills, enough to send your kids to college, etc. And then we get inflation. Right? So we have inflation. What is inflation? Inflation is the increase of the monetary supply out in the economy. What happens when you have more money in the economy and the same amount of goods? What happens? Those goods go up in price, right? Because there's more money chasing the same amount of goods. So only because there's inflation doesn't mean that the potato farmer all of a sudden has more capacity to grow more potatoes. More than likely, the potato farmer is going to have less capacity to grow more potatoes, instead grow less. Why? Because inflation is now going to affect his or her input costs, how much it costs them to grow those potatoes. Now what happens? Now the farmer is going to have to raise their prices just in order to continue to live the same standard of living that they were living before. It doesn't mean that they're becoming millionaires because they rose their prices. They rose their prices because now with inflation it's costing that farmer more to produce the same amount of goods. So he or she has to charge more for it just to break even. It's not that they're being greedy. And let me reiterate to you that nobody works for free. Ask yourselves, would you work 60 hours a week instead of 40 for the same amount of money? Most people would say, no way, I'm not going to work 50% more for the exact same thing. Same thing with the potato farmer. He or she is not going to work extra hours for the exact same pay. So they have to raise their prices. So the prices go up, let's say, to $2 a pound. But the government can't stop printing money. You see, price controls is always something that the governments try to use to fix the inflation that they've already imposed on the population. Right? It's because of inflation that governments impose price controls, because inflation gets out of control, and then the government has to try to save face by telling the people, hey, look, I care about you. These greedy potato farmers are charging way too much for their potatoes, so we're going to go ahead and tell them you have to keep your prices at $2 a pound, and that's it, no matter what. So now the potato farmer is faced with a problem. Now that inflation continues to go up and he can only sell his potatoes for $2 a pound, it means that now the potato farmer, if he or she continues to produce the same amount of potatoes, i.e. work 40 hours a week, all right, and I'm using 40 hours a week just as a number. I know farmers probably work a lot more than 40 hours a week, but let's just use it as this example. So if the farmer now only works 40 hours a week, he's only going to be able to sell certain number of potatoes. Why? Because his input costs are still going up. So if he continues to sell the same amount of potatoes, it's going to actually cost him more money, and he's going to make less dollars, meaning that he's working more for less. Because if he's making less dollars for the same amount of product going out, he's making less per hour than what he was before, meaning that he's going to have to work more for less. Well, what that's going to do is that is going to disincentivize the potato farmer from growing more potatoes. Why? Because he knows that he is selling those potatoes at a loss to his time, right? People always think about it in nominal terms as far as money goes, but it is your time. Your time is money. Your time is wealth. So now the potato farmer is like, wait a minute here. It's taking me X number of hours to be able to produce these potatoes, because now I have to pay more for the input costs. So now I'm losing some of my time that I've invested in this project and these potatoes. So now it's going to disincentivize him putting those potatoes out in the market. So he's going to end up putting out less potatoes in the market. And then what's going to happen? Since the prices are still the same and inflation is still going up, meaning more dollars in the economy, people are still going to buy those potatoes at an even faster pace, because they're the same price, but they've got more dollars in their hands because there's more money in the economy. So inflation is really a driver of price controls. First comes inflation, and then comes price controls. And then, ladies and gentlemen, eventually the farmer is going to see absolutely no incentive whatsoever to grow those potatoes, because now if he continues to sell them at the same price that the government has told him he has to sell them at, he's going to be losing money. So now not only is he earning less for his hours worked, but he's going to actually lose money, because his potatoes are going out the door so fast because people are buying them so fast, because in real terms they cost a lot less to the people that are buying them with the fake fiat paper that is being put out into the economy. So who loses? The farmer loses first, and then the farmer gets tired of losing, and then the people lose, because that product will not be put out into the market anymore, and there come shortages. All right, ladies and gentlemen, and then once the shortages occur, then that's where a black market begins. And then in a black market, the price of those potatoes are going to be a lot more, exponentially more expensive than what they cost at the store. But now the store doesn't even have them anymore, because the farmer will not sell them. And that's what price controls does. It creates shortages. So when we hear the words price controls, we need to understand that whatever it is that they're putting price controls on, eventually there will be a shortage on that. And not only a shortage, but probably it just won't be on sale anymore. So when you hear the words price control on whatever it may be, stock up on those items, because eventually they will not be available. And if they are, they will be available in the black market at a price that is really elevated compared to what it used to cost before. I hope that kind of makes sense. That's the way that I understand it, the way that I see it, and the way that I see that price controls will not work. At first, it may sound good to the consumer, but the consumer in the end will suffer with real term shortages. And of course, the producer will suffer as well, because eventually the producer's input costs are going to be greater than what he can charge for the potatoes as mandated by the government. And he'll have to just stop growing potatoes, because it's costing him money and costing him time. He's no longer just breaking even. And this article was written yesterday by John Miltimore. I believe that's how you pronounce his name. And he says price controls have failed for 4,000 years, and humans still have not learned. He starts off by saying the people of ancient Eshnuna can be forgiven for not understanding why price controls are harmful. Today's policymakers who have the benefit of history and economics have no excuse. In 1892, the French archaeologist Henri Pontnon made a historic discovery a few miles northeast of Baghdad, a massive tell that held the ruins of the ancient city-state of Eshnuna. So they discovered on these tablets that in that city of Eshnuna, they had implemented price controls. A discovery notable in that it appears to be the oldest historical record of humans fixing prices. And he says, I've attempted to verify this fact with economic historians and will let you know if I get a response. The fact that he's talking about, that he's attempted to get from economic historians, is whether it's the oldest historical. Not that it didn't happen, but that is the oldest actual historical find of prices being fixed. And here's what they discovered, and this is going to be very telling, ladies and gentlemen. This is what happens when you have price controls, all right? Here it says that 1 quart of barley. Now, I don't understand what these measurements are, like 1 quart of barley. So 1 quart of barley is priced at 1 shekel of silver, right? 3 QAs of best oil was priced at 1 shekel of silver. 1 seah and 2 ka of sesame oil were priced at 1 shekel of silver. And this is where it's very telling, ladies and gentlemen. At that time, if you hired someone to drive a wagon with its oxen, its driver would get, as far as pay goes, they would either get 1 masik tum and 4 seah of barley. So they would get this unit of barley, whatever that masik tum is, and 4 seah of barley. But if you converted that into how much silver it cost to buy that, if paid in silver, the higher is 1/3 of a shekel. Right? So 1/3 of a shekel for a day's worth of work. 1/3 of a shekel. And look at how much it cost to buy 1 quart of barley or 3 ka of oil. 1 shekel of silver. So it would cost this person 3 days worth of labor to buy just one of each of these items. That is what price control does. It actually eats away at your earning, at what you can earn, at your labor. Why? Because price controls, in my opinion, are first induced by inflation. And inflation eats away at your labor. And then price controls eat away at your labor too. Because price controls are telling the people that sell that item that they have to sell that item for less of their labor. So it's like a two-way thing. It's like a snake eating its own tail. This might explain the First Babylon Empire, why the First Babylon Empire fizzled nearly 1,000 years before the Greek poet Homer told the story of the Trojan War. Price controls don't work, and an abundance of history, as well as basic economics, proves it. A brief history of price controls. The ancient Greeks may have given us Homer and his wonderful stories, but they suffered from the same economic ignorance as the rulers of Eshnuna when it came to price fixing. In 388 BC, grain prices in Athens were out of control, largely because Athenian rulers had an incredibly complex set of regulations on agriculture, production, and commerce, which included an army of grain inspectors appointed for the purpose of the price of grain at a level the Athenian government thought to be just. Wow, doesn't that sound a little bit familiar, ladies and gentlemen? The penalty for evading these price controls was death, and many grain traders soon found themselves on trial facing such punishment when it was discovered they were hoarding grain during a man-made shortage. Why were they hoarding grain? Because they were not willing to give up of their labor because the government had imposed price controls on that which took their labor to produce. It's like I said, ladies and gentlemen, nobody works for free. And at any time that you disagree with somebody who made something, keeping it because the government's telling them you have to sell it at this price, again, ask yourselves, whatever it is that you make now, let's say you make $1,000 a week right now for working 40 hours, all right? If someone told you, okay, you need to work 60 hours for the same amount of money, what would you do? The Athenian Empire was history by the time Rome attempted its own price control scheme 700 years later on a much larger scale in 301 AD. The Emperor D passed his edict on maximum prices, which set a fixed rate on everything from eggs and grain to beef and clothing and beyond, as well as the wages of laborers who produced these items. The penalty for anyone caught violating these edicts was, you guessed it, death. Traders responded exactly as one would expect to these regulations. And listen to this, ladies and gentlemen. It's just like your labor. If somebody told you you had to work 60 hours for 40 hours worth of pay, would you bring your product to the market? The market being your job and the product being your labor. The people brought provisions no more to the market since they could not get a reasonable price for them, one historian wrote. Not coincidentally, Rome's empire soon went the same way as that of the Athenians, though the eastern half would survive another 1,000 years. And then there's the British colony of Bengal, located in northeast India. Few people today remember the Bengal famine of 1770, which is astonishing considering an estimated 10 million people died, roughly a third of its population. What's even more astonishing is how little attention the event attracted at the time. While many attributed the famine to the monsoons and drought that plagued the region in 1768 and 69, Adam Smith, writing in The Wealth of Nations, correctly observed that it was the price controls that came afterward that likely turned a scarcity of food into a full-blown famine. And out of a quote from the book, it says, when the government, in order to remedy the inconveniences of a dearth, orders all the dealers to sell their corn at what is supposed to be a reasonable price, it either hinders them from bringing it to market, which may sometimes produce famine even in the beginning of the season, or if they bring it thither, it enables the people and thereby encourages them to consume it so fast as must necessarily produce a famine before the end of the season. So you see what I mean? If the market doesn't find an equilibrium, the product is just going to be consumed so fast that it's going to be a shortage anyways, because the producer cannot keep up with it. Let me give you a quick example that I've used in the past. All right. So if you have a jar of candy, I don't have a jar of candy here, but if you have a jar of candy at work, put a jar of candy on your desk and put a little sign in front of it that says free. And people are going to come and pick it. They're going to say free. Oh, cool, right? Now, keep note of how long that jar of candy lasts on your desk before it is empty, okay? Then put a jar of candy on there that says 1 penny or 5 cents per. And then keep note of how long that jar of candy lasts there. Now, on a third bowl, once you've done the first two, put a jar of candy and put on there exactly what it cost you for that candy. Let's say it's 10 cents per candy, right? And see how long it lasts there. I guarantee you that the one that was free was not going to last very long whatsoever. The 1 for 1 penny, and I'm just making up these numbers. You can change it to whatever you want. You could put 10 cents, 25 cents, whatever. But the 1 for 1 penny is going to last a little longer than the one that was free. And the 1 for 5 cents or 10 cents, whatever it is going to last the longest. And now let's bring it forward to a little more recent history, right? Important market signals. Fortunately, today we have the advantage of not just history, but the science of economics to show us that price controls do not work. Basic economics teaches that prices are important market signals. High prices may be an aggravation for consumers, but they signal to producers the opportunity for profit, which leads to more production and investment. They also signal to consumers that the good is scarce, which encourages people to use less of it. All right, so prices have a place in the market. Take gasoline, for example. When prices are $7.50 a gallon, people drive less than they would if prices were $1, $3, or $5 per gallon. Meanwhile, the high price also signals to producers an opportunity for profit, which encourages them to produce more because they want to make that money, right? So it encourages them investment and production, which ultimately leads to lower gasoline prices. The solution for high prices is high prices, ladies and gentlemen. And he says here, as economists will sometimes say, the solution to high prices is high prices. Putting an artificially low price on gasoline sends the wrong signal to both consumer and producer. The low price discourages producers from bringing fuel to the market, and it also encourages consumers to use more fuel because it's artificially inexpensive, which is a recipe for a gas shortage. And this happened in 1970 after President Nixon announced price controls on gasoline, resulting in a sustained national shortage and massive gas lines. For what it's worth, Nixon knew his price control would not work. But he passed them anyways because it would show a signal to voters that he meant business. So it's like I often say, the policies that these clowns that sit in their ivory towers and act, they never affect them, but it always affects their constituents. Always, ladies and gentlemen. And look at this. I was looking at this picture right here. Gas lines from 1970s. Nixon passed price control. Look at the price. 35 cents. Oh, goodness. And here they go on to say price controls are back. Today, nearly all economists agree that price controls are harmful. Yet this has not stopped the specter of them from rising once again during our current global economic turmoil. And here they're talking about the price controls that the EU or the G7, whatever you want to call it, are putting on Russian oil. All right. It says here that Anxious recently reported price controls are back and are no longer a relic of the 70s. Facing an energy crisis, G7 countries are seeking to form a buyer's cartel that would effectively put a price cap on Russian crude oil. What do you think Russia is going to do? Do you think they're going to sell the oil at the cap that they put on it? Or they're going to sell it at whatever the market bears? See, ladies and gentlemen, the Western nations that are in these sanctions, that are participating in these sanctions, again, like I stated before, all of these sanctions, all of these rules, all of these laws, regulations, whatever it is, it's not going to hurt one policymaker, not one whatsoever. It's going to hurt you, the average working person. It's going to hurt us, the average working people. That's what's going to hurt, right? And they understand this. And I've kind of like have the notion that they know what's going to happen and that they want it to happen. The scheme, like all price control schemes, is likely to backfire. An abundance of evidence shows price fixing produces little beyond scarcity, black markets, and in worst case scenarios, death and famine. Today's policymakers who have the benefit of history and economics have absolutely no excuse except for the excuse that they want to bring in a reset of everything, ladies and gentlemen. And as I've stated before, many people will suffer, all right? And if you're not prepared, you will suffer more than most. All right, so prepare. As soon as you hear those words, price controls, in a city near you, on whatever it's going to be, you better go stock up on that stuff before they actually implement the price controls on those things, because they will eventually be scarce. Having said that, I hope you got something out of this. I know this is kind of a dry subject, but believe it or not, I believe that this is a very important thing for you to understand. All right, so for those of you that are still here, thank you very much for your support. Thank you for sticking around, and I hope that you are getting prepared and that when you hear the word price controls, that you definitely take advantage of the time you have left before scarcity, real scarcity, ensues. Remember to be good to each other. When good people do good things happen. Remember to reach one, teach one, and repeat. If we all did this, the world would be a better place, and you know that it will be a better place. Many blessings to all of you and your families. I'm Alaska Prepper. I am out. God bless you all.